What's happening, everyone? Steve here, Cars with Steve, and today we're doing a head-to-head comparison. This time taking a look at the 2022 Kia Seltos and comparing that with the Sportage. Going to be looking at the different cargo dimensions, engine choices, and everything in between. I want to give a huge shout out and a thank you to Durham Kia for giving me access to these vehicles to shoot the video for you today. Check down in the description below for their contact details. But let's dive into it, have a little bit of fun, and see what the differences are between the Seltos and the Sportage. Now, starting off with some exterior styling, the Seltos has 5 available trim level choices, which means we've got a series of different tires and rims that are available for the vehicle. Size-wise, they're going to be anywhere between a 16 up to an 18 inch, again depending on the trim level choice that you're after. Looking at the EX Premium, this specific one has 17-inch rubber on it. As we start to move forward, we've got our beautiful LED headlamps. On the lower trim levels, it's going to be a halogen headlamp, and then we've also got our fog lamps a little bit further down. Now, when it comes down to the actual drivetrain of the vehicle, depending on which trim level you're looking at, you might be all-wheel drive, you might be front-wheel drive. The majority of the Seltos lineup is going to be all-wheel drive, and it's an intelligent all-wheel, but we also do have the option of locking it out into our permanent four-wheel drive, so that all-wheel drive permanent as well. So rather than letting the vehicle determine if it should be front-wheel drive, what's going on with the power, we can lock it out instead, so we've got that four-wheel drive all the time. Now, taking a peek underneath the hood of the vehicle. So first thing I want to point out, I love the Seltos badge in the front of this thing. I think it pops and it does look very, very sharp. Contrasts nicely with that grille in the front there as well. I think it looks unbelievably sharp. As we hop underneath, so engine choices for the Seltos, we've got 2 choices, and that's going to be the same for Canada and the US. It's either a 2-liter naturally aspirated, so a 4-cylinder, like what we're looking at here, and there also is the optional 1.6-liter turbocharged engine, specifically in the SX Turbo version of the vehicle. From a power perspective, this 2-liter is going to be able to push out 146 horsepower and 132 pound-feet of torque, while the 1.6-liter turbocharged is going to push out 175 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque. So plenty of power when it comes down to it. Now, we do have easy access to a few things, so we can easily top up our washer and our coolant. We can easily check our oil, and we've also got easy access to the battery as well. Now, starting off with some exterior styling, so the night sky version of the vehicle I think looks absolutely beautiful. So like I said, it's like a blackout package for the vehicle. So when it comes down to the actual tire itself, we're either looking at 17, 18, or 19 inch, depending on which trim level of the vehicle we're looking at. This specific one, so when we look at the night sky, Nightfall, etc., it's going to be an 18-inch tire with this beautiful black rim instead. So when it comes down to it, great look. Now, moving forward into the actual headlamps themselves, so they're going to be halogen in the lower trim levels. We have the option for the LEDs instead in the higher trim levels. And that's going to be the same thing with our fog lamps as well. All right, now taking a peek underneath the hood of the Sportage. So we also have the option for the 2-liter turbocharged engine instead. From a power perspective, this 2.4-liter engine is going to be able to push at 181 horsepower and 175 pound-feet of torque. If you look at the 2-liter turbocharged engine though, that's where things get a little bit of an upgrade. Power-wise, in that turbocharge, you're going to be able to push out 240 horsepower and 260 pound-feet of torque. So plenty of power when it comes down to it. Now, taking a peek underneath the hood itself, very straightforward. We've got easy access if we need to top up some fluids. We can easily check our oil, and then we've got very easy access to the battery as well. Now, taking a peek at the key fob of the vehicle. So in the very bottom, we've got our Kia logo there, which new logo I love the look of. Towards the front of the fob, we've got our lock button, our unlock button, as well as our horn or a panic alarm. Now, on top of that, in the very bottom, we also do have our emergency access key. So we can just crank this thing out if we ever need to get access to the vehicle and the fob has died. Now, one of the cool things is that we do have the option of remote starting through our cell phone, or we can also just press and hold on the fob. So we're going to make sure that the door is locked first, and then we're just going to press and hold this button. As you can see, remote start is now there. In order to cancel remote start, we're just going to press that button again once, and remote start is now canceled. Now, in order to get into the trunk of the vehicle, so if we look at the fob itself along the side there, we don't actually have a trunk release button. So it's actually a manual process inside of the vehicle. So what we're going to do inside of the vehicle, as you can see there, we've got our Kia logo. Underneath, we're just going to press that button there, and that's going to unlock, and we can just lift this thing up. So one of the cool things is that we do have this cargo cover. So this protector cover lets us know that we can kind of make sure that anything that's underneath there is safe. Popping this thing out is very easy. All we're going to do is literally just lift out both sides, and we're just going to push in, rotate, and pull out. Let's have a peek at the cargo dimensions. So cargo dimensions for the vehicle are going to be showing up. So as you can see there, we do have quite a little bit of width and depth towards the vehicle. Now, one nice thing is that we're 60-40 split, so 60 driver, 40 passenger, so we can fold down one side or the other if we wanted to. Now folding the seats down is very straightforward. Along the back of both the seats, so on the driver passenger side, there's a little latch. We're just going to crank that one up and we can literally just pop these seats forward. So I'm going to do it to both. Here now, take a peek at the difference in the cargo dimensions when we have that second row folded down. So we get quite a little bit more depth when it comes down to it. So that's one good thing to know. Now, one other thing to point out is that the measurements that you're seeing on screen, it's from the very bottom towards the loading area. So very top to bottom there. And the reason why is because if you've got a box that's bigger, you're not gonna be able to fit it in. But if you're stacking some things, if we go from the very bottom to the very top, we've got a couple extra inches of space. Those few extra inches matter. And we also have the option of taking this cover out. So we can take it out and there's a second tray. So we can lower it down a little bit more. And when we have it lower, we get a couple extra inches in the bottom as well. So if we're storing even more things, we've got way more flexibility when it comes down to it. And same thing, this thing can come out completely if we really wanted to. And we can get about an extra half an inch or so roughly more when we do that. Now as we hop inside the back, so taking a peek along the left-hand side, we don't have anything there. We've got a tiny little bit of storage space on both the left and the right side. And then this is going to be the clip for that actual cargo shade there. And moving back, as I mentioned, this whole thing comes out, but when we lift up, we've got our mini spare tire there. We can slide this whole tray out and we've got our jack there as well. Now taking a peek at some standard technology, we are always going to have that backup camera inside this vehicle. Outside of that, we won't have the reverse sensing system inside of this, but we do have a lane keeping system as well as the blind spot system. So lane keeping system, same thing, might be available in your trim level. Same thing with the blind spot system. Blind spot system will work two different ways, either just the warning or it's actually got the avoidance system as well to help pull you back into your lane. Now, filling up fuel inside of the vehicle is a very straightforward process, and it is a locked cap, which I think is brilliant. In order to open this thing up, just along our driver's side door, we've got a little button there, and we're just gonna pull that thing up in order to open this thing up. And as you can see there, we are a capped system as well. So when it comes down to fuel quality, regular 87 gas is all you need to use. That's a minimum manufacturer's recommendation, regardless of whether you're looking at the 2-liter or the 1.6 turbo. Taking a peek at the key fob of the vehicle. So as you can see there, we've got our Kia logo along the bottom. We can access our key easily by pressing that button. Moving to the front of the fob, we've got our lock button, our unlock button, our trunk release, as well as our horn or a panic alarm button. Now one thing to note, some versions of the vehicle you may have remote start, some of them not. So we will be able to have those UVO services in the highest trim level of the vehicle, which means we can remote start directly through our cell phone, which I think is great. Now, in order to be able to get into the trunk of the vehicle, so along the very bottom, as you can see there, we do have our hold button, so we can press and hold in order to be able to unlock the tailgate. Now, one other thing to point out, so underneath the T in Sportage, if we go down, there's a little handle there. So we're gonna grab that handle and that's gonna unlock, and we can just lift this thing up. So we do just have a regular liftgate inside of this thing. Inside of some trim levels of the vehicle, you might have a power one, and that's going to be a smart liftgate as well, which means that we can approach the back and it's going to automatically raise the liftgate for us. This specific one doesn't have that option, but have a peek at the cargo dimensions. All right, so cargo dimensions for the vehicle are going to be showing up. So as you can see there, we have a good amount of width and depth to the vehicle when it comes down to it. And we are a 60-40 split, so 40% driver, 60% passenger, so we can fold down one seat or the other if we want to. All right, now take a look at the difference when we have that second row folded down. And one of the nice things is that this thing actually does fold fairly flat, which I'm pretty surprised about. So fairly flat fold, which is a nice thing. Now there are a few different measurements that are showing up. So the first measurement is going to be from the very bottom to the actual top of the loading area. The second measurement is going to be from a little bit further in to get us to the very top of the roof. Now, there are two different measurements because if you've got a larger box, you're not going to be able to shove a larger box because we've got a couple extra inches past this lip. You're not going to be able to shove a box in that's that height. But if you're stacking boxes, things like that, you get a little bit creative. You could absolutely fit things that are a teeny little bit bigger. Now, as we start to hop inside of the vehicle, so a few things to point out there. So along our left side, not much to write home about. So we do have a little hook along both the driver and the passenger side there. And as you can see, we do have the option for a cargo shade. So a privacy shade, we can easily install that if we wanted to. Moving down, this is going to be the standard cover for the back. We do have the option for a thermoplastic rubber tray. We could look at WeatherTech as an option there instead. But as we start to crank this thing up, as you can see, we've got a little storage area. Moving it up a little bit more, we also do have our tire mobility kit. So same thing, certain trim levels of the vehicle will have a mini size spare. Most of them will have this tire mobility kit though, but we do have a little bit of storage space in the back there as well. And one of the nice things is that this whole cover, we can literally just crank this whole thing out in order to slide it out. So if we need a little bit more space, we can easily do that. All right, taking a peek at some standard technology. So at a minimum, we will have our backup camera. That's going to be standard across the entire vehicle lineup. Certain trim levels of the vehicle, we will also have the reverse sensing system. The Nightsky version doesn't have that as an option, but it is available in some of the higher trims. We will at least have heated mirrors, and that's going to be standard across the entire vehicle lineup as well. We also do have our blind spot system. So our blind spot system lets us know if anybody's under the blind spot on either side of the vehicle. When it comes down to filling up fuel inside of the vehicle, very straightforward. Just along our driver's side, we've got a little cutout there, and it is a cap system, so lockable, which is nice. So click that in order to lock it back into place. Now, when it comes down to the fuel quality, just regular 87 gas. So 87 octane is all you need to use inside of this vehicle. And that's gonna be the same whether you're looking at the 2.4 liter or the 2 liter turbocharged engine if you're down in the States. All right, now, as we hop into the second row, so I've got the driver's seat set up for somebody 6 feet tall. I'm 6 feet tall, and I still have a nice amount of knee room and a good amount of foot space. Up overhead with me sitting back, I've got about 3 inches of head space as well, so plenty of space back here, which is great. Now, one thing to note, these seats are locked into place, so we can't move them forwards, backwards. We can't adjust the backrest either. Depending on the trim level of the vehicle you're looking at, you might or you might not have a pocket in behind the passenger side seat. We're never gonna have one behind the driver's side. Moving into the back of the seat itself, we do have cup holders there as well. As you can see, so cup holders, click it, lock it back into place. As we look behind the armrest, we do have a little storage area, so a little cubby hole there, and we also have another USB port, so we can power some things up if we need to. Looking up overhead, we can also control our cabin lighting. We've got a handle as well as a little hook in the back. All right, now taking a peek at second row spacing. So I'm 6 feet tall, driver's seat setup for somebody who's 6 feet tall, and I still have a nice amount of knee room, good amount of foot space, and up overhead, like I'm surprised, like I've got like 3 inches of head space up overhead as well. So if you've got some taller people, knowing they'll definitely be able to fit back here. Now, one other thing to note, the seats, you can actually recline them a little bit too, which is kind of nice. So there's a lever by our left side on the driver, right side of the passenger, moving backwards like that. Like it's like 4.5 inches of headspace. So if you've got some taller people, they'll definitely be able to get inside of this thing. Now on the back of the driver passenger side, we do have some pockets there as well. So if we need to store some things, we can absolutely do that. We've got our handle up overhead, and we've also got a little hook there too. As we move into the back, so we do have cup holders, and that's going to be standard across the entire vehicle lineup. So we've got 2 cup holders there. Click it, lock it back into place. As we move forward, so as you can see there, we've got our basics for our actual fan control, and then we also do have a 12-volt power point, so 180-watt power point in the back there. Now, when we get into certain trim levels, it's actually the SX Premium, so the highest trim level available, we're going to have heated second row seats. With those second row seats, we would have buttons in the back, and it's just going to be the outboard seats that'll be heated. So that driver passenger side, this middle seat is never going to be heated. Now, taking a peek along our driver's side door, so we've got a button on the outside there. We can press that in order to be able to unlock or lock the door. And then hopping inside. So driver's side door there, we've got a nice look when it comes down to it. Buttons along the very top are gonna let us control our side view mirrors, and we've got our basics for our window control. Moving down along the driver and passenger side, we also do have a cup holder and a little bit of storage space. Just to the left-hand side of the steering wheel, so we can either increase or decrease the brightness of the cluster screen. We've got our engine start-stop button, so that's the one that's potentially going to kill power to the engine if we're stopped for an extended period of time. We've got our lane keeping button, and then we've also got our traction control, so we can turn that system on or off if we want to. Now, adjusting the driver's seat inside of the Seltos might be a manual process, might be a power process, again, depending on which trim level of the vehicle you're looking at. Now, if it's manual, lever in between our legs, but inside of the power is really cool because we've got a couple of toggles along the side. We can use the first one to go forwards, backwards, up, and down. Next one over is going to be for the backrest, so we can go backwards and forwards with that one. And then we've got another button for our lumbar support. So it's two-way power for the lumbar, but it is comfortable to give us a little bit of extra stability in our lower back. Now, one thing to point out, when the seat is all the way back and all the way down, back, still go, there we go, okay. All the way back, all the way down, like, look at this. I've got tons of knee room, tons of foot room. Up overhead, I've got about, ooh, what's that? Like 4 inches of headspace roughly. So if you're taller, you could definitely fit inside of this vehicle. Now, one thing to note, this one does have the sunroof. So if we get an option, one of the lower trims that doesn't have the roof, it'll give us about an extra inch or so roughly of headspace up overhead. So definitely one thing to think about. In order to be able to adjust the steering wheel, it's going to be a manual process across the entire vehicle lineup. So just by our left knee, we've got a little lever there. We're just gonna crank that down and it's telescopic. So we can go in, out, up and down. Once you've got that perfect position, click it, lock it back into place. Ooh, okay. Now, hopping inside the vehicle, so first impressions, this thing looks really, really sharp. Like, I love the new Kia logo. They did a great job on the redesign. Now, this part of the video is just going to be a quick walk around explaining some of the basics of the steering wheel as well as that media screen. If you're looking for a more in-depth walk around and how all this stuff works, check down in the description below because I've put together a comprehensive video. But let's look at some of the basics. So we have a little button along the top left-hand side of the steering wheel, and that's going to be for a few things. So we can use our voice in order to make phone calls, change radio stations, things like that. If we had our phone connected through Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, we would also have the flexibility of using either Google or our Siri assistant instead by pressing that button, which is kind of cool. We've got our mode button, which can change between different modes. We can answer or hang up on a phone call. We can adjust our presets, and we've also got a volume rocker there as well. Along the right-hand side, we can switch between different pages inside of the instrument cluster screen, and this specific version of the Seltos also has the adaptive cruise, so that smart cruise system. That smart cruise system is literally that. It's a smart cruise, so it's a set it and forget it cruise control. You set it, let's say 100 kilometers an hour on the highway. If the car in front of you slows down, yours is automatically going to brake. If they pick up speed or get out of the way, yours will resume that set speed again. So really great system. If you've never used it before, I honestly just recommend giving it a try, because once you really figure out how to use the adaptive cruise, I don't think you're ever going to go back to regular cruise control again, if your vehicle supports it. But a few other things to point out, we've got our lane centering system, so that's the one that's literally going to keep us in our lane as we go, and we've got a distance indicator, so how close or how far are we away from the vehicle that's in front of us. We've got our left turning stick, we can flash our high beams if we want to, and then we can also figure out what's going on with the actual running lamp, so we've got a few different settings there. Along the right side, we can figure out what's going on with our windshield wiper, and we can also flick on the wiper for the rear as well, so very straightforward. Now, as we move over, I did mention this one is push button start. When we get into that media screen, so a lot of flexibility when it comes down to the screen itself. So if your vehicle does not have factory navigation, don't worry about it, because we still do have the option of using either Google Maps, Apple Maps, or Waze by connecting through Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. But we've got some great features and a lot of flexibility when it comes down to it. As we move down, we've got a volume rocker. We've got some basic buttons as well to jump between different screens inside of this media screen, and we can also tune. But honestly, using the tuning rocker that way is probably the least effective method, because we can just press the button on the steering wheel, and we can use that in order to be able to change songs, radio stations, things like that if our vehicle supports it. So really, really great feature. Moving down a tiny little bit more, we've got our basics. So this is actually a really cool system for our climate control. So it's a mix of like a visual screen as well as our regular push buttons as well. So I think it's kind of neat what Kia's decided to do with this thing. I love the look of it. Down a little bit more, we do have the option for wireless charging in some trim levels of the vehicle, but the wireless charging pad isn't where you might think it is. So normally you'd kind of look right in front of the USB ports, but this one actually is hidden a little bit further back. It is kind of nice. It's kind of neat that it's hidden. And when you have a phone charging, there's a little indicator light letting you know that. So something to think about. Your phone may support it. You just have to dive in a little bit in order to see it. We've got a little handle along the side there as well. Moving down a bit, we've got a series of different drive modes. So we've got our normal, smart, or our sport mode, and each mode is going to do something different. Now, I always recommend keeping it in the sport mode, especially when you look at engines that don't have too much power to them, and even the 1.6 turbo. And the reason why is because that's going to hold the RPMs a little bit higher. It gives it a much sportier feel as you're driving, so definitely recommend keep it in that sport mode. If you're looking for something where you don't necessarily care about the power, we can switch it into the eco mode instead, so that's smart mode, and that's going to keep things a little bit, it's not going to rev it quite as high. It's more for that, I just want to get from A to B. I'm in no rush. That's really what you're looking at there. Moving down, we've got our shifter knob. We've got our basics like our park, reverse, neutral, drive, but we can also flip it over for our standard mode. So we can go up and down between gears if we want to. So that's kind of neat. And one of the cool things is that we can also shift that on the fly. So as you're driving, you want to get a little bit more of a sportier performance, drop it into our smart mode, into our shifter mode, and then we can go up and down as necessary. And then flick that back up from there. Now, at a minimum, this thing is also going to have at least heated seats. Now I say at least heated seats because this thing also has the option for ventilated seats, which in the summertime, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I love the ventilated seats. And it is just a switch down here, so we can go between either our cooled or our heated seats. If your car doesn't have the heated seats, it's just going to show the heated button there at a default. And as I said, you're at least going to have heated seats. Down a little bit more, this one also does have the heated steering wheel, and it's the heated wheel all the way around, so great during winter time. Off to the other side, we've got our all-wheel drive lock, so definitely, it's kind of cool. I love the fact that Kia's got that all-wheel drive lock, because otherwise it's an intelligent all-wheel drive. So the vehicle's automatically going to flip us out between power in each wheel, depending on what it recognizes that we need, or we can permanently lock it out to that four-wheel drive if we wanted to. Down a bit more, we also do have our controls for our passenger seat, same thing, heated and ventilated. And then we've got a hill descent control, so a downhill brake control button. Now what that's going to do is if we're going downhill and we're doing more technical driving, like think off-roading, things like that, it's going to keep us at a set speed. So we literally only have to worry about driving with the steering wheel, and the vehicle is going to keep us at that speed. So if you're going off-roading, just knowing that that feature is available. Down a bit more, we've got our electronic parking brake. You're going to pull up to turn it on, and you're going to press the brake and push down in order to turn it off. Down a bit more, we also have our auto hold setting. So the auto hold setting is an interesting one because when we shift the car into drive and we take our foot off the brake, it's literally going to hold us into place. As we move down a tiny bit more, we do have a few cup holders, and then we've also got another little storage space. Into the actual armrest, we do have a little bit of storage space in there as well. No additional ports inside of this thing, but in front of the shifter, we have we've got a 12-volt power point, and then we've got 2 USB ports as well. We've got one USB port for power, and the other one if we're going to be hooking a phone up for Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. As we start to move up overhead, auto dimming rear view mirror in this trim level of the vehicle. It might be a manual flip instead. Up ahead a little bit more, so we do have a few basics. So we've got our tow, we've got our SOS modes as well. All right, now as we hop inside the vehicle, so driver's side doors, as you can see, we've got our basics for our window control, so we can control our side view mirrors. We've also got our auto folding for our side view mirrors there as well. Down a little bit more, we've got our basics for our window control. We do have a little bit of storage space there. Driver passenger side, we've got some room for a bottle there if we'd like to. And then just to the left-hand side of the steering wheel, so we can increase or decrease the brightness of the instrument cluster. Adjusting the driver passenger seat inside of the vehicle might be a manual process, might be a power process, depending on which trim level of the vehicle you're looking at. Now inside of the Nightfall version or the Night Sky version of the vehicle, manual process for the driver and the passenger seat. So in between our legs, we've got a lever there. We can crank that up to slide the seat forwards and backwards. We've got one on the side, and that's going to raise the seat up, and we can also lower it down. We've got one for our backrest as well, so we can bring that backwards or forwards to our liking. Now, one thing to note, with the seat all the way down, all the way back as well, up overhead, I've got like 4.5, almost 5 inches of headspace up overhead. So if you've got some people that are a little bit taller, they will absolutely be able to fit inside of this vehicle. Now, one thing to note, this one doesn't have the sunroof. So when we look at one with the roof, definitely something to think about because we lose about an inch and a half roughly of headspace up overhead with that roof, but nice look when it comes down to it. Whew. All right, now moving into the driver's seat. So a few things to point out here. This is just going to be a quick look at the actual steering wheel as well as that media screen. If you're looking for a more in-depth walk around, check down in the description below because I've put together a comprehensive video. But looking at some of the basics of the steering wheel, it's actually really, really nice. Along our left-hand side, we've got our voice command prompt, which is going to be useful if we're connected through Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, so we can use our Siri Assistant by pressing that button. We've got mode, which is going to let us change between our active modes, so we can change between AM, FM, Sirius XM, etc. We can answer or hang up on a phone call. We've got our volume rocker, and then we can also scan using this button as well. Off to the right-hand side, we've got our basics. Now, this specific vehicle just has your regular cruise control. When we get into some of the higher trim levels, that's when we've got our smart cruise, so that adaptive cruise control system, which essentially is a set it and forget it cruise control. But this specific one doesn't have it. If it did, those buttons would show up and it would look slightly different. But we've got our basics there. We can also figure out what's going on with the instrument cluster screen. So we've got a few different screens that we can jump in between, fuel economy, trip counters, things like that. Now, one thing to point out, we do have a physical key in some trim levels of the vehicle. Those higher trim levels are going to give us push button start instead. So which one you get is going to depend on which vehicle you go for. Now, looking at the left stick, that's going to be for our turning stick, and then we've also got our basics for our light control. The stick on the right is going to be for our windshield wiper. So very straightforward there. As we get into this actual media screen, so great look when it comes down to it, but something to consider. If you're in some of the lower trim levels, it's going to just be that, a media screen for playing songs, looking at radio stations, making phone calls, connecting through Android Auto, Apple CarPlay. When we get into the highest trim level, so the SX, that's when we're going to have our factory navigation built directly into the screen as well. But one of the nice things is that if you don't have factory navigation, you don't need to worry about it because you can still use Android Auto and Apple CarPlay for Google Maps, Apple Maps, Waze, things like that directly through this middle screen. As we start to move down, we've got some basics for our audio settings. So we do have a few different options. We can tune, there's a rocker there. We can also use that rocker on the steering wheel in order to be able to tune that way if we wanted to. Moving down a little bit more, we've got basics for our climate control, we've got our basics for our front or rear window defroster, and then we've also got heated seats. Now the heated seats, that's a nice thing because that's going to be standard in this vehicle regardless. Doesn't matter which trim level of the vehicle you're looking at. When it comes down to the higher trim levels, we actually will get ventilated seats in this. So we've got a cooled seat, which is really, really nice. Now, speaking of seats, looking at the actual seat quality, some of them are going to be cloth, some of them are going to be synthetic leather, and some of them are going to be actual leather. So which one you get is going to depend on which trim level of the vehicle you look at. But like I said, regardless, like this base cloth seat is surprisingly comfortable in that headrest. It's like there's a cushion in the headrest. It is so comfortable. I absolutely love it. Moving down a tiny bit more, we have a 12-volt power, well, two 12-volt power points, I should say, as well as a USB port. We've got our gear shifter, park reverse neutral drive, and then we've also got a manual mode as well. So we've got the option of flipping out gears if we want to do it that way instead, if you have that preference. So the vehicle's automatically going to switch. It's an automatic transmission, so it's going to depend on if you like to have that feeling of that manual control or not. Moving down a little bit more, we've got a series of different drive modes. So our normal mode, eco, sport as well. Each mode is going to do something different. Typically when we're in that sport mode, it's going to hang onto the gears a little bit longer. So your RPMs are going to go up a little bit higher, giving you a little bit more of a sportier performance. Next one over is going to be our downhill brake control. So what that's going to do is it's going to hold us at a certain speed. So if you're doing technical off-road driving, things like that, vehicle will literally keep you at that speed and you only have to worry about working the steering wheel. We've also got, which is a kind of a neat one, we've got our all-wheel drive lock, which is kind of nice because the vehicle itself is equipped with either front wheel or all-wheel drive, depending on which trim level of the vehicle you're looking at. It is kind of nice that we've got that the all-wheel drive lock though, so really, really cool because if you're driving wintertime, sure, the vehicle's, it's got an intelligent all-wheel drive, so it's automatically going to shoot out power as necessary, but we can permanently lock out that all-wheel drive as well, which I think is a great option. We've got a few cup holders and a few storage trays there as well. And one thing to note, moving forward, we do have the option for wireless charging. Same thing, not standard in every trim level. It is available there though, if we wanted it. Moving down a bit more, we've got our armrest, little cubby there with a ton of storage space. As we start to move up overhead, we do have our mirror there, so manual dimming there. Up a little bit more, we do have our sunglasses holder, which is nice. It's going to be standard across the entire vehicle lineup. And then we also do have our cabin lighting. Now, I did mention this specific one doesn't have that sunroof, but it is available as an option if we wanted to go to a higher trim. Moving up overhead a bit more, we've got our visor, which does have with our vanity mirror, and it does have the light there as well. We can take this and we can also extend it out a tiny little bit more in order to block the sun that might be hitting our eyes. But really, really nice though when it comes down to it. Well folks, that was a look at the Sportage versus the Seltos. Which way do you think you would go? If you have any questions, drop down in the comment section below and let me know. And until I see you next time, make sure you stay safe.